I never thought that a family dinner would end with my only son screaming across a linen-draped table, calling me a traitor in front of strangers. Marcus's voice cracked like he'd been rehearsing a speech and forgot the last line. "You ruined everything!" he shouted, standing up so fast his chair skidded back. Simone stared at the wire confirmation in my hand like it was an obituary. I didn't flinch. I just took a sip of water, wiped the condensation from my tote, and pulled out the signed closing documents. My attorney had warned me, let them show their hand first. So I had. In the private room of Bar August, with Simone's family seated like they were attending a pre-wedding toast, I opened the manila envelope and laid out every receipt, every notarized form, every page of proof that the apartment was legally sold that morning, without a single Evans signature involved. Simone's father looked stunned. Her mother started tapping her phone under the table. I waited. Marcus kept trying to speak, but his voice collapsed into half sentences. We were supposed to. His face turned red. I passed the final page down the table. The deed transferred to a newly created trust in my name, executed 10:17 a.m., witnessed, stamped, and wired for $485,000. The buyer? A retired couple moving in from North Carolina. The funds? Sitting in a high-yield Truist Trust account under my full legal name, with withdrawal privileges restricted until next spring. "This apartment was mine," I said, quiet but clear. "It is no longer, so there's nothing left to fight over." Nobody moved. Even the server paused, holding back dessert. Simone's mother whispered something to her husband. Eyes locked on the signature line. Marcus looked like he might cry, or punch the wall, or both. I folded the wire receipt, slid it back into my bag, and finally stood. We're done here. Leverage changed hands at exactly 6:43 p.m., documented by a time-stamped sale, and 2 witnesses who had no idea they'd just watched a family implode. 4 months earlier in January, Marcus had invited me to a dinner with Simone's wealthy parents under the pretense of family bonding, but it was clear from his voice that I was being presented like a liability he had to manage. He called on a Sunday evening, voice overly casual, telling me Simone's parents were finally ready to include me more, like I was a stray they'd warmed up to. The dinner would be at a steakhouse uptown, his treat, no special occasion. Just a chance to get to know each other better, he said. The way he framed it, you'd think Simone's family were royalty, and I was lucky for a seat. I asked what I should bring or wear. He told me to keep it simple, nothing too flashy. That stung. I've worn the same pearl earrings for 20 years, never once chased flash. Still, I pressed my slacks, wore a navy blouse, and pulled my hair into a neat bun. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the lobby because Marcus had asked me not to go in alone. When they finally walked in, Marcus in a pressed blazer, Simone in some beige cashmere number, and her parents trailing behind, I noticed none of them greeted me with a hug. Simone's mother gave a tight smile, and her father went straight to the host without a glance in my direction. Marcus gave me a quick "Hey, Ma," like I'd just been dropped off at the curb. At the table, it became obvious what this really was. Simone's father launched straight into questions about my apartment. Where was it located? How long had I lived there? What was the HOA like? I tried answering politely, but my responses were met with sideways glances between him and Simone. Nobody asked about me. No one wondered about my health, my work, my life. They were interested in square footage, zoning, mortgage status. Marcus kept redirecting the conversation back to how cozy the place was and how I'd done well for myself on a modest salary. The words were coded in something slicker than praise. I knew the tone. It was the same one people used at church when they admired your thrift store shoes because they couldn't believe you were still standing. By dessert, Simone's mother asked if I'd ever considered downsizing now that I was nearing retirement. I smiled without showing my teeth. I told her I wasn't planning to move. Not yet. But that was the moment I realized they were. Back then, I still cooked dinner from scratch in my modest Buckhead apartment, clipped coupons, and ignored the fact that Simone only called when she needed a notarized form or access to my spare bedroom for her friends. I made excuses for her, told myself she was busy with work, that she and Marcus were just overwhelmed with wedding plans or new job stress. The truth was, I knew exactly what it was. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as a resource. A notary on demand, a place to park out-of-town guests, a warm casserole during flu season. I kept a calendar on the side of the fridge, paper, not digital, where I'd jot down appointments, birthdays, and notes about utility readings. I started noticing patterns. Simone's texts always came on a Friday night or early Sunday, just before banks closed or long weekends hit. Can I stop by real quick? Do you have that stamp still? Mind if my friend sleeps over just for one night? Never a check-in, never a thank you, and never without some kind of ask folded inside. Once, I walked into my guest room after one of Simone's quick visits and found a monogrammed robe from a spa in Savannah on the bed, something I never owned. I knew that friend hadn't just stayed one night. The robe smelled like perfume I couldn't name, and the trash can held 2 empty wine bottles and a receipt from Whole Foods I didn't buy. I folded the robe, tossed the receipt, and didn't mention it. I still thought silence was safer than confrontation. Marcus rarely showed up without her anymore, and when he did, he was distracted. Half listening, phone always face up on the table, texting between sips of coffee. When I asked about his job, he gave short answers. When I brought up the raised property taxes, he nodded like he already knew, like he'd been preparing for something I hadn't caught on to yet. I kept hoping there'd be a shift. That maybe, just maybe, once they settled down, things would even out. That Simone would grow into her role as daughter-in-law, that Marcus would remember how many nights I spent waiting up during his flu seasons and school dances and first heartbreak. But every visit just reminded me I'd become a convenience, not a person. The last time she asked to use my notary stamp, she didn't even come herself. She sent a courier. When Simone asked if she and Marcus could temporarily stay in my apartment while their mortgage was pending, I agreed, only to find 6 weeks later that she'd changed the mailing address on my HOA account to her own name. She'd asked during a phone call Marcus never joined, said their lender had hit a snag and they needed a few weeks to breathe, claimed they were boxed in by delays and didn't want to renew their lease just to move again. It'll only be for a little while, she said, just until closing. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to help, but because Simone never used soft words unless she was angling for something. Still, I let them in. I shifted my schedule, moved my paperwork into a locked cabinet, cleared the guest bedroom, and even stocked the fridge with oat milk and sparkling water, Marcus's favorites. They showed up with more luggage than I expected. Not just a suitcase or two, but moving boxes, 2 garment racks, a shoe shelf, and enough toiletries to fill the entire hall bathroom. By the 3rd night, they'd claimed the living room for Zoom meetings and rearranged my furniture for better lighting. Simone unplugged my landline without asking. Marcus adjusted the thermostat like he paid the bill. I let it all slide, convinced it was temporary, just a transition. I told myself I was being generous. Family made space. That's what we did. It wasn't until I tried to call the HOA office in early March to ask about a tree trimming schedule that I got the surprise. The clerk on the phone asked to verify my mailing address. When she read it back, I froze. Simone's name, her email, her phone number. I didn't recognize the mailing address. It wasn't mine anymore. She'd updated it online without my permission. I didn't confront them that night. I needed to think, to see how deep the switch went. I pulled out every HOA statement I could find and checked postmarks. The last paper one had arrived in January. After that, nothing. I hadn't noticed because Simone had been bringing in the mail, sorting it to be helpful. That help was her cover. The change wasn't just sneaky. It was strategic. And it was the first sign I was no longer the only one claiming ownership of my own home. My neighbor and retired paralegal friend, Cynthia Griffin, reviewed the HOA statement with me and flagged the switch in mailing address, a maneuver often used in quiet title claims or adverse occupancy prep. I brought her the envelope on a Thursday morning, pretending it was a routine question. Cynthia didn't do small talk when paperwork was in front of her. She opened the bill, pulled out a notepad, and started writing. "You didn't authorize this change?" she asked without looking up. I shook my head. She gave a low hum and circled the account name printed near the top corner. Simone Evans. Not co-listed. Not care of. Just Simone. She slid the statement back across the table and asked how long they'd been staying. I told her 6 weeks. She didn't flinch, but I saw her eyes tighten. That's enough time to build a possession case if you're not careful. I must have looked confused because she kept talking. It's subtle, but it's a start. Change the mailing address. Pay utilities. Receive packages. It builds a paper trail. Makes it look like they've been managing the property all along. I sat still for a moment, then reached for the yellow folder I'd brought with me. Inside were the HOA emails Simone had forwarded to me, claiming it was just quicker if she handled them. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Cynthia did. She highlighted one section where Simone requested a gate code reset, calling herself, quote, property manager. The term wasn't legally binding, Cynthia explained, but it was suggestive. They're trying to stack small claims into one big assumption, that you've stepped away and they've stepped in. She asked if I still had my original HOA agreement. I did. She told me to make 3 certified copies and drop one off with her by the weekend. We're not pressing a panic button yet, she said, but you need to establish a paper trail of your own. That night, I took my dinner alone on the back porch, while Simone and Marcus streamed a movie inside, with the volume too high. I heard them laughing, carefree, like they were already home, not visiting, not borrowing space. I stared at the porch light I'd had replaced last fall. Marcus never offered to help hang it, but now, somehow, they thought it was theirs. By Friday, I had my documents copied, dated, and notarized. 3 sets, sealed and ready. The clue that shattered the illusion was a single line item in my March electric bill. Autopay enrolled, account holder Simone Evans, even though I never enrolled anyone else. I'd logged in to check a routine usage spike, nothing unusual for spring, but paused when I saw Simone's name where mine should have been. Not a joint account. Not an authorized user. The system had her listed as the primary. My stomach turned cold. I hadn't touched the Georgia Power account since 2021, when I set it to paper billing only and removed my online credentials for security. It was a system I controlled, or so I thought. I took screenshots immediately. Top banner, account history, payment settings. I didn't know what would matter yet, so I saved everything. Simone had enrolled in autopay using a joint card I didn't recognize. The cardholder name was listed as M. Evans/S. Evans. It wasn't just a casual mistake. You don't land in the primary holder slot unless you change credentials, override access, or build a new login entirely. I hadn't given her the login, so either she guessed it or reset it. I printed the statements from December through March and highlighted each payment. 3 monthly charges, paid on time, drawn from their card. It would have looked generous to anyone else, a helpful couple picking up the tab. But I saw what Cynthia warned me about. Proof of use, continuity of payment, a digital breadcrumb trail suggesting ownership or management. When I brought it up at breakfast, I watched Marcus squirm. He didn't deny it, he deflected. It's just for convenience, Mama. You always forget the logins. I didn't reply. I just folded the statement and placed it under my coffee cup. Simone didn't even try to defend it. She tapped her phone, smiled like nothing was wrong, and said they were streamlining things for me. That word streamlining landed like a warning shot. I saw what was happening now. One step at a time, they were replacing me on paper. They hadn't asked to take over, they'd just started doing it. After breakfast, I drove straight to the FedEx office, printed affidavits of account ownership, and filed a notarized statement declaring sole utility control. The clerk stamped the receipt at 2:37 p.m., just before close. I kept that stamped receipt folded inside my checkbook. It was the first piece of hard proof that someone was trying to erase me quietly. I logged into my Georgia Power account, reset the password, saw 3 months of bills paid from a joint Marcus Simone card, then froze the account and switched utilities back to paper billing in my name only. It took 3 security prompts and 1 hold call to customer service to regain control. Simone had changed the email recovery address to one I didn't recognize, something corporate sounding, nothing personal, and listed a backup phone number that wasn't mine. I had to answer questions about my first gas provider from 15 years ago just to get back in. Once I did, the access log told its own story. Logins from 2 different IP addresses in the last 8 weeks, none of them mine. I changed everything. Email, password, security questions, and deactivated all saved payment methods. Then I opened a new Gmail account, created specifically for utilities, and updated the contact information on Georgia Power, the Water Department, and Internet Services. Every account, one by one. Each confirmation email felt like a piece of my identity being stitched back into place. I printed hard copies and filed them in a new fireproof lockbox I bought that same afternoon. Not a safe Simone could stumble across in the hall closet. One with a key only I carried. I also activated paper billing, a move that Marcus once called old-fashioned. But paper left a trail they couldn't tamper with unless they stood at my mailbox. And after what I'd seen, I wouldn't put it past them. Back home, I walked through every room slowly, not for sentiment, but for inventory. I made a list. Furniture I'd purchased, artwork I'd hung, appliances I'd repaired. I took photos, labeled each image by room and date, and uploaded them to cloud storage tied only to my new account. Then I printed a master list and tucked it in the lockbox too. When I went to turn the thermostat back down, it had been set ridiculously high. I found the Nest account locked. Simone had changed the admin. I contacted the manufacturer, filed a support ticket, and submitted proof of residence. The lockout was reversed within 24 hours. Another name removed. By evening, I had full control of every system they'd touched. Billing, temperature, bandwidth, water flow. I wasn't naive anymore. If they wanted to rewrite the story of this apartment, I'd make sure my version had timestamps. When I casually brought it up over brunch, Marcus smirked and claimed, "It's just for convenience, Mama." While Simone avoided eye contact and said they had financial strategies, I wouldn't understand. We were seated at a small corner table at Juniper Spoon, a spot Marcus used to like when he still paid for meals. The waiter had just taken our order: avocado toast for Simone, French toast for Marcus, black coffee for me, when I pulled out the Georgia Power printouts and laid them between the salt and sugar. I didn't raise my voice or accuse anyone. I just asked, "Who gave you permission to change this?" Marcus didn't even look at the page before shrugging. He leaned back, stretched his arms, and spoke with that practiced calm he used when pretending I was overreacting. "It's not a big deal," he said. "You hate dealing with all this stuff anyway. We were helping." Simone shifted in her seat, picked at her napkin, then launched into some vague explanation about financial consolidations and tax optimization. She talked like I should be grateful, like what they'd done was some kind of invisible labor on my behalf. I watched her talk without interruption, not because I believed a word of it, but because I wanted to hear how far she'd go. She spoke in circles, dropping terms like streamlining, efficiency, and household equity. She never once said your apartment. She called it the property. That slip told me everything. I asked her directly, "Are you trying to establish residency?" Her fork paused mid-air, but she recovered fast. "No, of course not. Why would you think that?" she said with a nervous laugh. I didn't answer. I just pulled the second printout from my tote, this one showing the payment method tied to the autopay. She went quiet. Marcus stepped in then, voice a little sharper. "Mama, it's not like that. You're making this harder than it has to be." Harder for who? That was the part he didn't say out loud. I paid the bill before the food even arrived, told the waiter we needed it boxed up. Neither of them offered to cover the check. On the drive home, they said nothing. I let the silence settle. Simone texted me later that night to say, "Sorry if things felt tense." A sentence crafted to make the tension mine, not hers. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Cynthia with the subject line, "They're still trying to play polite." A week later, I found a copy of a lease agreement, unsigned but typed up, with Marcus listed as landlord and Simone's cousin as tenant, using my apartment's address and unit number. It had been tucked between printer paper and envelopes in the drawer by the front hall. I'd been looking for a roll of stamps when I pulled out the manila folder. At first, I thought it was one of my old lease renewals until I saw the header, Residential Rental Agreement, with my address spelled out in full, Unit B3, down to the correct zip code. Marcus had used a template from some online landlord service, probably one of those legal sites with fill-in-the-blank PDFs, and completed nearly every field. Monthly rent set at $2,400, term length 12 months, security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. His name sat on the lessor line, typed in bold, followed by his personal phone number and a Gmail address I didn't recognize. Simone's cousin, Latasha Evans, was listed as the lessee. I hadn't seen Latasha in years, and certainly hadn't spoken to her since a birthday barbecue Marcus hosted when he still lived in East Point. She'd never set foot in my apartment, and now she was penciled in to occupy it, starting May 1st. That date was less than 4 weeks away. I checked the signature fields. Both lines were blank. No initials, no witness names, but the preparation was clear. This wasn't some draft pulled by accident. The form had been fully filled out and formatted, ready to print and sign. All that was missing was a date and a pen. When I confronted Marcus, I didn't show him the lease. I wanted to hear his version first. I asked whether they had any plans for the apartment after moving out. His face stayed neutral too long before he said, "We figured we might help someone out if it sat empty." "Help who?" I asked. He blinked, then mumbled something about Latasha needing a place and how it wasn't serious, just an idea. But his voice betrayed him. Too rehearsed, too calm. I didn't say another word. I photocopied the lease, scanned it to a secured folder, and logged the date and time I found it in a new notebook I'd started, just for documentation. They thought they could convert intentions into entitlement. I had it on paper now that they were trying to profit off something they didn't even legally control. The real blow came when Cynthia found a quitclaim deed draft in public county records, dated February 3rd, with my name forged in low-res scan and notarized by a woman working at Simone's brother's car dealership. She called me after dinner on a Monday evening, voice sharper than usual, not wasting time on pleasantries. "You need to come over right now," she said. I was still in slippers when I walked across the hall, with my folder of documents under my arm. Cynthia had pulled the preliminary transfer documents from Fulton County's e-records portal after deciding to run a search for my parcel ID. We'd done it before together, just to verify the title was still clean. This time, she didn't wait for me. The minute I sat down, she turned her monitor toward me. There it was, filed but not finalized. A quitclaim deed transferring ownership of my property to Marcus Evans. The signature looked like mine, if you didn't know my hand. Sloppy, like someone traced it from an old birthday card. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Not because of the shock. I'd half expected something like this, but because I saw the notary's name, Tasha Freeman. I remembered her. She was the receptionist at the used car lot Simone's brother ran off Memorial Drive. She once asked me for a referral for a loan officer. Next to the notary seal, the date, February 3rd. That was the same week I'd been in urgent care for blood pressure complications. I'd been on bed rest for 4 days. I had medical records to prove it. There was no way I'd signed anything. Cynthia was already ahead of me. She'd printed a comparison of my verified DMV signature against the one used on the document. "They filed it electronically," she said, "but it didn't go through final processing because the system flagged a formatting issue. That error might have saved the apartment." I took pictures of the screen, saved a PDF copy, and emailed it to Brian Ellison, the real estate attorney I'd quietly reached out to 2 weeks earlier. I didn't explain in the email, just wrote, "We need to meet. Now we have forgery." That night, I changed the locks. Didn't tell Marcus. Didn't tell Simone. I hired a mobile locksmith, paid cash, and made sure only 2 keys existed. They wanted quiet control. I was preparing for a loud correction. I immediately contacted a real estate attorney, Mr. Brian Ellison, of Ellison & Carr, LLP, in Midtown, who advised me to initiate a preemptive sale to halt any false transfer of ownership while an investigation was underway. We met the next morning in his office, a quiet third-floor suite overlooking Peachtree. He'd reviewed the forged quitclaim deed I'd emailed overnight and didn't waste time pretending it was ambiguous. "You have attempted fraud. Documented. This isn't just an ethical violation. It's a criminal setup. You need to move quickly," he said. Brian explained that once a forged deed enters the record, even if rejected or marked defective, it creates confusion in the title chain. That confusion can be exploited by people claiming interest, delaying rightful sales, or refinancing. "The cleanest way to beat it is to sell before they can escalate," he said, flipping open his legal pad and jotting down a list of tasks. I asked whether I could sell it with an ongoing family dispute. He nodded. "You own it outright. There's no lien, no mortgage, and no injunction. That deed didn't process because they were sloppy. You still hold all the leverage, for now." He referred me to a private seller's agent he trusted, Mrs. Ruth Delgado, someone experienced in quiet sales and discreet listings. Ruth called me that afternoon and arranged a meeting in her home office. She specialized in off-market deals, retired professionals, divorcees, widows looking to transfer assets without family interference. She didn't ask invasive questions. Just read the file, asked about my price range, and said, "We can do this without noise." We set the list price at $485,000. Fair market. Not a penny under value. Ruth's contacts included a pair of buyers moving from North Carolina, older couple, no kids, looking for a small second home near Piedmont Park. She scheduled a private walkthrough the following week. Meanwhile, Brian began drafting an affidavit of sole ownership and a notice of fraudulent activity. He promised to file both with the Fulton County Recorder's Office within 5 business days. He also urged me to stop any oral communication with Marcus and Simone unless it was documented. They'll deny, manipulate, and backpedal. You respond only in writing from now on. By the end of that week, I had a seller's contract drafted, a buyer's interest confirmed, and the paperwork moving. They thought they were stalling me into surrender. I was already in motion, and faster than they knew. It broke my heart to realize Marcus had never asked how I was doing after my blood pressure scare in December, but had the audacity to plot a fake transfer while calling me family on Instagram. I remembered lying in the ER, heart racing under fluorescent lights, alone. He hadn't even picked up the phone that night. I'd called twice, left one voicemail. Simone texted me 2 days later with a thumbs-up emoji after I mentioned it in passing. No follow-up, no visit, no flowers, just an icon. They posted matching holiday pajamas on social media the week after, #, #family first, and #grateful season. The caption read, "Blessed to build our legacy, grateful for our foundation," and there I was, unmentioned, unseen, left out of the frame in every sense. Brian's office asked me to gather any public-facing materials that hinted at ownership claims. I started combing through months of digital posts, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I found captions referring to our place in Buckhead and our starter home. One post from Simone read, "Can't wait to renovate once the dust settles. Manifesting design dreams in our first property." That one included a photo of my living room, with my couch, my art, my drapes, all staged like part of their future. I saved everything, screenshots, URLs, timestamps, forwarded them to Brian's paralegal. It would help show intent, he said, proof that they were publicly claiming possession before anything legal had occurred. What I didn't expect was the way it made me feel. Not just anger, but something colder, something sharp. I raised this child, paid off that apartment with extra shifts and boiled rice dinners. I skipped vacations, wore the same coat for 6 winters, and never missed a single parent-teacher meeting. And yet he saw me not as a mother, but as a transaction. Even after I secured legal footing, that realization sat heavier than any document I filed. But I didn't stop. I met again with Ruth Delgado, finalized the seller's disclosure, and sent over HOA compliance docs. The closing date was proposed for April 6th, 4 weeks out. Brian scheduled my affidavit filing for the 27th and blocked time for a possible emergency hearing if the forged deed resurfaced. They could call me emotional. They could call me paranoid. But they couldn't call me unprepared anymore. Their legacy plan was built on my silence. I was preparing to make noise where it counted. With Brian's help, I listed the property off-market through a private seller's agent, Mrs. Ruth Delgado, and scheduled a private will meeting for April 6th at the same bistro Marcus had picked for our family dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd chosen that place to stage control, a soft ambush masked as a celebration. I turned it into a closing table. Ruth secured a buyer within 10 days, a retired couple relocating from Asheville, who loved the neighborhood and agreed to a clean cash sale. No contingencies, no inspection delays, just signatures and wire transfers. While the sale processed, I asked Brian to prepare an amendment to my will. Nothing extravagant, just clarity. I removed Marcus as contingent beneficiary on any property assets and reassigned them to a community health fund I'd supported for years. My bank statements, trust papers, and updated beneficiary forms were all in order before the end of March. Every item filed, logged, notarized. The foundation for what they thought they were inheriting had already shifted. I told no one, not even Cynthia, the details of the final meeting. Too much talk invites interference. Marcus still called occasionally, usually late, usually acting warm. Simone texted twice asking if I wanted to help plan a brunch for Mother's Day. I didn't respond to either. Their charm had always come with an expiration date. On April 5th, Ruth confirmed that the wire was scheduled for noon the next day, with the closing papers to be signed at 3 p.m. Brian would attend in person, along with a banker from Truist. I booked the back room at Bar Auguste under my name and requested seating for 8. Simone's parents were invited, through Marcus, under the assumption that we were all gathering to discuss future estate planning. Let them believe it. The more confident they felt walking in, the harder the truth would land. I wore a charcoal blazer and low heels, brought only one bag, structured, black, everything inside labeled. Ruth carried the sales contract and final transfer deed. Brian brought certified affidavits. The banker carried the wire receipt and trust documents in a sealed envelope. I didn't need backup, I needed witnesses. At 3:06 p.m., I checked the folder one last time and walked into the restaurant ahead of schedule. Not to be polite, to claim the head of the table. That day, we met in a glass-walled back room of Bar Auguste with Simone's parents, 2 agents, and my banker from Truist, who brought the certified wire transfer receipt and notarized closing docs for all to see. Marcus had picked the venue weeks earlier, assuming he'd be the one holding court. But when he entered and saw Ruth and Brian seated beside me, his smile faltered. Simone blinked at the banker's folder, like she couldn't quite process the presence of someone with real authority. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Langford, were dressed for influence, all cashmere and polished leather, but they were 10 minutes late and arrived expecting a favor, not a reckoning. The host poured water. I gave a polite nod, but didn't rise when Simone's mother extended her hand. I gestured toward the open seats and said we should begin. Brian handed each person a printed packet. Sale summary, transfer documents, trust setup terms. Everything prepared, certified, closed. Mr. Langford skimmed the first page and narrowed his eyes. "This is finalized?" he asked. The banker answered before I could. "Wire transfer completed at 12:09 p.m. today. Buyer received keys. Funds secured in a high-yield irrevocable trust in Mrs. Evans. Name." Marcus exhaled, more hiss than breath. Simone went still. Not defensive, not confused, just quiet, like someone trying to stall their next move. I opened my folder and spoke evenly. "This isn't a negotiation. This is documentation. There is no apartment to inherit, lease, claim, or collateralize. It's sold, properly, to strangers who don't know your names." Simone's mother bristled. "You made this decision without consulting family?" "Family didn't consult me when they filed fraudulent documents," I said. Then I turned to Simone. "Or when they attempted to list this address as a rental income property. Or when my signature was forged on a quitclaim." No one denied it. They simply stared, expressions rearranging themselves by the second. Ruth slid a copy of the final sale contract toward Marcus. "This page shows your mother as the only legal title holder prior to this transfer." She paused. "There is no recorded deed placing anyone else in ownership, not even temporarily." Silence spread across the table like fog, the kind that hides everything until you're already too close to avoid it. I took my pen from my blazer pocket, signed the last confirmation sheet, and handed it to the banker. Transaction complete. Lies disarmed. I laid out the documents: title history, utility logs, forged lease drafts, notarized forgery proof, and finally, the deed transfer to a trust in my name, explaining clearly, this apartment is no longer in dispute because it is no longer mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of each document did what I no longer had to say out loud. Brian handed out copies as I spoke, each one time-stamped, signed, logged in 2 jurisdictions. Simone's parents had come expecting leverage. They were met with evidence. The title history showed 22 years of ownership in my name alone, no liens, no co-signers, no amendments. I pointed to the notarized date on the fraudulent quitclaim, circled in red. That document was submitted while I was recovering from a hypertensive episode. I said, and it bears a forged signature verified by 2 independent handwriting specialists. Simone's mother squinted at the highlighted section and turned to Marcus. "You didn't mention any of this." He looked down, lips pressed shut. He wasn't confused. He was cornered. I slid the electric bill records across the table next. 3 months paid with a card linked to their joint account, each bill listing Simone as account holder. "Presented as convenience, intended as groundwork," I said. Ruth added, "That activity implies control. Combined with the lease agreement discovered last month, it becomes an orchestrated claim." Simone, finally speaking, muttered that it had been exploratory, that Latasha never signed anything. I didn't bother responding. The proof was already there. An unsigned lease isn't harmless when it's filed away like a draft in motion. Intent mattered. Brian confirmed as much. Last came the deed. Executed that morning. Transfer of ownership to the Eleanor May Evans Living Trust. Sole trustee, me. The trust terms restricted asset liquidation, prevented family transfer without judicial review, and sealed the asset from third-party claims. This property was once a home, I said, but it became a liability the moment it turned into a target. Simone stared at the deed like it was foreign. Marcus looked like he'd swallowed something sour and couldn't spit it out. The Langfords didn't speak. Their silence was the clearest acknowledgement I'd received yet. I tapped the edge of the folder with one finger. Slow and deliberate. We're not discussing potential. We're closing facts. When Mr. Wang from Truist confirmed the $485,000 sale had been completed and the funds secured in a 12-month high-yield trust account in my sole name, Marcus turned sheet white and Simone choked on her drink. There was no ceremony to the moment, just a printed receipt, a banker's calm voice, and the sound of possibility collapsing. Mr. Huang placed the receipt in front of me with both hands. Wire cleared, 12:09 p.m. Eastern. Irrevocable transfer into Eleanor Evans Trust. Access governed by scheduled disbursements. First available draw, April 6th next year. I nodded, folded the page in half, and placed it back into my folder. Brian leaned slightly forward, enough to signal that every protection was now legally active. Simone blinked rapidly, one hand on her water glass. She hadn't touched her silverware. Marcus leaned back in his chair, then forward again, shifting like he couldn't decide which reaction would make him seem less exposed. "So that's it?" he asked, voice low, almost childlike. "You just sold it?" "I protected it," I said. "From misuse, from assumption, from people too entitled to ask and too careless to thank." The Langfords sat frozen. Mrs. Langford's eyes darted between the pages on the table, then back to Simone. "You said it was promised," she whispered. "You said the paperwork was in progress." Simone's only answer was a look that begged for time she no longer had. Ruth was already packing her briefcase. Brian tapped his pen once, clearly done offering explanations. The banker remained seated, professional, and unmoved. The only person not unraveling was me. Simone, scrambling now, reached across the table like she might physically halt the outcome. "We didn't mean to go behind your back," she started. "It was just planning." Marcus thought. "No, I cut in." Marcus didn't think. He assumed. There's a difference. I stood slowly, collecting only the documents that mattered. The rest could stay behind as reminders. "You made the apartment a strategy. Now you'll have to recalculate." I walked out with the receipt in my purse and the keys to a new bank-controlled future. No title disputes. No delays. No more pretending we were on the same side of anything. The apartment was no longer theirs to expect, mine to defend, or anyone's to dispute. It was gone. And I had every cent secured under my terms. Simone's parents, visibly stunned, excused themselves from the table after Simone admitted they had told them for months that they were inheriting the apartment and had already listed it as collateral for a boutique loan. Mrs. Langford's hands trembled as she folded her napkin, eyes fixed on her daughter with a disbelief that bordered on disgust. "You used her property to apply for credit?" she asked, voice tight. Simone didn't answer directly. She murmured something about a retail expansion, claimed it was tentative, said they never finalized the paperwork. It wasn't denial. It was spin. Mr. Langford's silence was heavier. He stood abruptly, motioned for his wife, and offered a clipped, "Excuse us." They didn't shake hands. They didn't even glance at Marcus. Their exit wasn't dramatic. It was damning in its restraint. A quiet walkout from people who had believed they were aligning themselves with stability. Once they were gone, the temperature in the room dropped. Marcus tried to salvage the scene, asking if this meant we couldn't revisit things later, if there might be, quote, a way to still involve family. I didn't bother pretending. "Involve yourselves in what?" I asked. "The apartment no longer exists in your orbit. There is nothing to revisit." He looked at Simone as if she might rescue him with some clever phrasing, But she had nothing left. Her image, curated, poised, future-focused, was crumbling under the weight of one truth. They'd built expectations on a foundation they never owned. Brian stood to leave, but not before sliding a final envelope across the table. "You may want to consult your own attorney," he said. "There may be consequences for misrepresentation if that loan application advanced under false property claims." Simone barely nodded. Her hands were clenched in her lap, nails dug into her palm, but her voice was gone. No more financial strategies, no more curated calm. As I gathered my things, Marcus made one last appeal. "You didn't have to go this far," he said. "We could have worked something out." "We tried that," I replied. "You chose a forgery over a phone call." I stepped out of the room, past the remnants of the brunch that was never eaten, and into the hallway where Ruth waited with the closing folder in hand. Behind me, all their angles had collapsed. Ahead of me, only clean paper remained. By April 10th, I filed a formal fraud complaint with Fulton County Recorder's Office regarding the fake deed, sent cease and desist letters to Marcus and Simone, changed the locks, and closed my new condo in Decatur with my own keys in hand. I arrived at the courthouse early, documents in order, stamped envelope tucked neatly in my tote. The clerk accepted the complaint without hesitation, after seeing the forged quitclaim and notary mismatch. She scanned each page into the county system while I stood quietly, watching my history separate from theirs line by line. The cease and desist letters had already been mailed certified the day before. 2 separate envelopes, each including notice of fraud, revocation of access, and a formal demand to vacate any legal reference to my name, property, or accounts. Brian had drafted them to leave no room for ambiguity. Marcus would find his at their last known address. Simone's went directly to her boutique's P.O. box. Back at the apartment, the locksmith I'd hired returned to rekey the locks once more, this time with full cylinder replacement. No more spare keys in the kitchen drawer, no more access codes shared out of habit. He handed me the new set on a brushed steel ring. I held it without speaking for a long moment before slipping it into my purse. That same afternoon, I met the notary at my new condo in Decatur. 2-bedroom, top floor, no shared walls, a community garden out front, and a small patio in the back where I could grow tomatoes come summer. The sale had gone through smoothly. No fanfare, no sabotage, just a clean transaction between seller and buyer, the way it should be. I signed the final documents at 3:17 p.m. The notary stamped the deed transfer, slid the copies across the counter, and congratulated me with a warm smile. "It's a lovely unit," she said. I nodded but didn't answer right away. My voice was still catching up to the reality that everything, finally, was mine again. No schemes waiting in the guest room. No forged leases hiding in drawers. No adult child asking for things he never earned. Just square footage I paid for, light I switched on myself, and peace that didn't come with a performance. I opened the patio door, felt the breeze roll in, and locked it behind me from the inside. A small click. My choice, my timing, my life.